Did you guys see this stat? That the only two teams not to have an offensive snap where they have been in the lead this season through 4 weeks. You ready for it? Only two teams. The New York Jets and the New York Giants. That's amazing, right? And the amazing part about the Giants is last year they were one of the surprise teams of the league. They not only got to the playoffs, they won a playoff game. And the reward for Daniel Jones was a new contract. He was offered a new deal. So too was Saquon Barkley. He took his first. Saquon Barkley passed and eventually agreed to terms on a 1-year contract where he could be franchise tagged in future years. The results have been, well, an abject disaster. The crazy part about the Giants is that on paper, they're better across the board. On paper, they're better across the board. The problem with paper is, well, who uses paper anymore, right? I mean, when was the last time you wrote something down? Heck, I listen to a book. I listen to a book every day. I don't read a book. A friend of mine gave me a new book. I'm like, I miss the idea of turning pages, but I really struggle with the idea of actually reading them. But on paper, Giants should be better. They're not. Daniel Jones, bad decisions. Daniel Jones, interceptions. And, oh, yeah, by the way, the Giants allowed not 1, not 2, not 3, 11 sacks. They're coached by Brian Daboll, who's seen as a quarterback whisperer, and he whispered Daniel Jones all the way to a tremendous season last year and a new contract this year. It really runs to $40 million guaranteed over the next 2 years. There is money on the back end of it, but none of it which guaranteed. Here's Daboll on what went wrong with the game.
Yeah, I'd be upset too if I was a fan. So there's a lot of things we got to do better, and that's what we'll try to do. I thought, defensively we did a lot of good things. Didn't get the job done. I had too many penalties on special teams and didn't score on offense. So, got to figure out a way to make that better.
Here's Daniel Jones after the game.
I mean, obviously I didn't play well enough. It was unacceptable, and I let the team down. So I've got to fix it. I got to work hard to get it right, and I'm going to do that.
Okay. I mean, look, I mentioned this yesterday that if you don't think there are guys who fail in New York who can be redeemed, look on the other side of the field. And I know he got hurt last night, but Geno Smith, right? Like Geno Smith was lustily booed when he started for the Jets and when he started for the Giants, and eventually kind of had to leave town as a backup, and here later in his career has got another opportunity and taken great advantage of it. So there is still time for redemption, but everybody points to the contract, which is a big part of it. It's a really big part of it. That the fact that it's not just he's making that money and that it takes a big portion off the cap and is a huge dead cap number, so he's virtually untradeable. But there's also just the reality to how people react knowing that it's reported as a 4-year, $160 million deal. It's really 2 years at 80, that's 40 a year. Okay, it's still a lot of money, but it's not as bad because it doesn't last as long as other quarterbacks extensions could have. And this has always been the thing for football players. The years may change, the number of years may change, the amount of money may change, but there is always a balance of, hey, if you want more money, take a shorter deal. If you want less money but more guaranteed, you take a longer deal. So why was Daniel Jones overpaid? Because he would agree to a 2-year contract. And because, look, it hurts their cap the next 2 years, especially next year. It's going to really hurt their cap. But he ain't going anywhere this year, and he probably ain't going anywhere next year. You're stuck with him. You got to fix it. You got to do better. You got to get him on the move. It also speaks to just how easy their schedule was last year and how it's been much more difficult this year. Right? Say what you want about how good the Seahawks ultimately will be. This is the same Seattle team that has beaten the they beat the Lions, probably a playoff team, right? They lost to the Rams at home, but they beat the Lions on the road. And a Seahawks team that made the playoffs last year, that at 3-1, that dynamic defense with an offense that can run the ball and not turn it over on offense, and Tyler Lockett long, right, can probably end up getting to the playoffs again. The juxtaposition of their schedule this year with the Giants' schedule last year, and you start to understand, hey, some of it is not just that the Giants aren't good this year. They weren't that good last year. They just played a easy schedule, right? So, I mean, go back and look at the New York Giants 2022 schedule. You know, I mean, think about it. They beat Tennessee. That was a good win. That was a surprise the first week of the season. Carolina, one of the worst teams in the league. Chicago, one of the worst teams in the league. Green Bay didn't make the playoffs. Ravens didn't have Lamar Jackson. Their big win that last year was at Jacksonville, who did end up going to and winning in the playoffs. But, you know, late in the season when they started playing real teams, they tied the Commanders and then beat the Commanders, who were bad last year. They beat the Colts in a come-from-behind win. Right? They lost to the Lions, the Cowboys, the Eagles the second time around, the Vikings, and the Eagles again. In other words, the playoff teams they played, they lost to. And they beat the Vikings in the playoffs. And maybe you see this as a win for Saquon Barkley, but if you really know what happened, where Saquon Barkley was like, hey, we're going to offer up 2 contracts, and whoever takes it first gets it, whoever takes it second gets the franchise tag, Daniel Jones took it first. So how do you fix it? You got to fix the line. You got to get him running the football and them on the run. He's got to play better. They need Saquon back. And the reality is they have kind of a mostly new team outside of some of the skill position guys or quarterback and running back, a couple of the offensive linemen, and they're struggling with cohesion. But that was one ugly football game, and they couldn't block or block for him at all. At all. I will tell you something really cool. Did you see Bobby Wagner had 17 tackles last night? You're like, dude, Bobby Wagner. Dan Byer, I asked on social media last night, and it was like a 20-1 ratio. Bobby Wagner, a Hall of Famer?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's no question. 100%. Yeah. Absolutely.
Man, he was good last night. He's some guys are just better tacklers than other people. Right? It's one of those weird things. You know, it's like in basketball, some people will catch a basketball just have better hands. Like you can't teach it. Maybe it's taught at a youth level. But have you ever noticed that it feels like if you get in Bobby Wagner's grasp, he brings you down. Whereas other guys are just not that good at tacklers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think his position also lends to the high numbers, but yeah,
but the percentage of the guys he gets his hands on that go down seems high.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Just seems like a very high. If there's got to be some sort of tackling percentage ratio out there, and he's well above average.
It's the longevity as well, because
Yes.
you know Jordan Brooks last year took over his position when when Wagner went and played for the Rams, and Brooks was a league leader in tackling as well. But it's that Wagner's been able to do it. Plus, Wagner's had, especially in his early days, the ability to cover. Yeah. Yep.
He can really run.
Yes.
He doesn't run as much now.
No.
But last night he didn't have to run as much because they were such a mess. You know, I mean, 11 sacks.
Well, yeah. And I think juxtaposed against what the Seahawks were doing, the Seahawks didn't have 80% of their starting offensive line. And it's not that Geno Smith had an easy night or Kenneth Walker III went crazy, but still. And I know Andrew Thomas wasn't playing for the Giants. That's another piece there. But when you see how the Seahawks were at least able to manage their offense and get some things done. But their defense obviously carried the game because of how bad the Giants were in blocking their anybody and getting after Daniel Jones.
You know what's interesting is we're so critical of Daniel Jones, and rightfully so. He fumbled twice. He lost one. He had 2 interceptions. He absolutely didn't play well. It's interesting. It's like Brian Daboll has not received much of the blame.
No. And I liked the Giants coming into this year. I thought that they were going to take that next step. And it wasn't just because it's Daniel Jones and another season in Daboll's system. Maybe I took for granted Saquon Barkley's health. But remember, they added Darren Waller this offseason. He was non-existent. He ended up catching 3 passes, 2 of which happened in the final 5 minutes of the game, which were totally meaningless receptions. You have a defensive line that is Leonard Williams and Kayvon Thibodeau, and you would think that would maybe be a strength, maybe kind of go back to the, JPP, Justin Tuck and, Michael Strahan and O.C. Umenyiora days of, hey, this Giants front 4 is back. That hasn't necessarily transpired, where their defense has been able to help their offense out. Everything has gone wrong for them, basically, this year. All the spots that you thought that they were going to make gains, or I thought they were going to make gains, they have actually went backwards. And one other point, Doug, what the amazing thing about it is you can actually name their weapons. They're not household names, but we know Darius Slayton, we know Sterling Shepard, we know Paris Campbell, we're getting to know Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodgins. Like, you're going 5-6 deep in terms of their receiving core, and they get nothing out of it. Like, there's no Odell Beckham Jr., there's no Hakeem Nicks, there's no go-to guys, if I'm going to reference old Giants. It's amazing on how nothing has transpired at all in these first 4 weeks of the season.
Really amazing. And again, like you said, they should be better across the board. Across the board.
Darren Waller? I know his time.
I don't think Darren Waller is good anymore.
I'm wondering myself.
I just don't. And it's one of those Josh McDaniels, how could you, feels like you knew. He's not good. And here's one of the things we do with Darren Waller. He's an amazing personal story, right? By his own accounts, he was addicted to partying and addicted to drugs when he played at Georgia Tech and early in his career in the NFL, and he was nearly out of the league. And it's remarkable, and his personal journey should be rewarded with, you got your life in order, you got married to Kelsey Plum, they look happy, all that stuff is great. But it doesn't preclude you from being judged as an athlete, and he's just not nearly what he was billed to have been previously when he was with the Raiders.
Here's the other thing that I think hurts Waller, and I think it's 100% true. John Gruden came from a coaching tree of Andy Reid and Mike Holmgren in the use of the tight ends and how those – look, Travis Kelce.
Brian Daboll, when he was in Buffalo, did they use the tight end a bunch? Was it Dalton? No, it wasn't Schultz. What's the kid's name they have there? But not the same.
Yeah, Dawson Knox was there. Charles Clay was there for a little while. I don't know if the times crossed. Daboll also spent some time in New England. But how important the tight end is to that West Coast offense that Gruden ran, you saw how it was a great match with the Raiders. It really was. They figured out a way to use him. I don't know if that's the case right now in New York.
It's I think probably, I'm trying to think, of the teams, it's not that they lost to, two of those games you lose to. The Niners and the Cowboys are better than everybody else. Right? They play this weekend. We'll talk about it some. But it's the fact they have not had the lead for an offensive snap.
Yeah. This
season.
That's
crazy. Stunning. It's crazy. We throw around the word crazy. Oh man, that's crazy. Oh man, that's crazy. That's nuts. That's crazy. Haven't had the lead.
Yeah. If they would have lost to Arizona, Doug, I think we could have just dismissed them. All right, they're done, and they may already be done, but they were able to somehow manufacture a comeback and win the game.
Yes.
Maybe it was more about Arizona, but it's almost like that win then that stands out so much because of how bad they've been in the other spots, which doesn't give them any excuses. Maybe some years it's just not your year, but we at least saw them come back against the Cardinals. There's no reason why they shouldn't score an offensive touchdown at home, and they haven't done that in the first 2 games
Think
of the
about
season.
this. They have the Dolphins coming up next on a short week to prepare. Then they go to Buffalo to take on the Bills.
Oof.
Right? Like they're staring 1-5 right there in the face. And then Commanders, they do play the Jets this year. Like if you think he wasn't protected, like man, the Jets, they still have to go to Dallas. They have to go to New Orleans. I don't know how good the Saints are, but they're always better in New Orleans. And they have the Eagles twice. Like yikes. But those next 2, I mean, if you think things are bad now, wait 2 weeks. That's a rough recipe for a season. And I tell people all the time, it's the Parade magazine effect, right? When you ever picked up that Parade magazine, and remember back when we got newspapers, you had the Parade magazine on a Sunday edition, and once a year they would have the What People Make. You know, you're like, man, a librarian makes $75,000? I'm in the wrong business. Right? Once people find out what you make, they judge you completely differently. Completely differently. They judge your work differently. If Daniel Jones was making $5-10 million, they'd be like, get rid of him. He's whatever. When you pop up, when it says, and this is one of the things that agents always do this, right? They always want to celebrate 4 years, $160 million. Now it's really 2 years, $80 million, which is still a lot of money. But I think a good portion of the reason, the energy behind the criticism is just that. And you got to be prepared for when you sign that deal as an athlete.